In this tutorial, I'll be talking about the scope of variables in PHP. The scope of a variable is the context within which it is defined. This is just a summary to explain the scope of a variable. I will try to expatiate further with so many examples. For example, if you have a function, let's call it sum, that takes in a variable, this is $array, and it has its body. If you have another function, let's call it subtract, that also takes in an array, and this is the body of the function. This variable is defined in this function, and this function is bounded by these two curly braces. The meaning is that this variable can only live within the scope of its definition. This is the scope of the definition of the variable. This other variable for this function, $array, has its own definition here. Even though these two variables have the same name, they are two different variables. If you also define another variable here, maybe you have something like array2 to be something, and you also have an array also 2 to be also another value. Though they have the same naming, but they are two different things, because the scope of this is this context in which it is defined. Let's cite another example. If you have an if-else statement, if a condition is met, then a variable, let's call it variable, equals a certain value. Else, we are using the same naming, variable is also some other value. The variable here is different from the variable here because the life cycle of this variable is this context, and that of this is this context. Even though they have the same naming, but they are two different things entirely. So that is the meaning of the word. The scope of a variable is within the context in which it is defined. Let's take another example. For the for loop, you have for, and you have variable I to be 0, and you also have some other conditions there. This variable I will only live within this context. If you have another for loop, this variable I also will live within this context. So there are two different things. But anytime you make reference to $I in this context, you are still referring to the same variable. And also when you make reference to $I here, you are still referring to the same variable. But outside the context, you are referring to another variable, even though they have the same naming. But in some situations, you may like to access your variable in another context. For example, if you have a function which is sum, takes in some input. You also have another function which is subtract, that has some input values also. And you want a variable to be accessible here and here. In that case, you define what is called global variable. That is, you have to define a variable outside these two functions. So you can have something like this, a variable equals to some values. So in this case, you can make reference to variable here and also here. But to do that, you can do either of these two things. The first one is, before you access the variable, you have to put the keyword global. So you have global $variable, And after this, you cannot access this variable. The other way to do it is to use a global array. So you have dollar, so you write globals, and the key should be the name of the array. In our case, the name of the array is variable. So you have something like this. In this case, you can access the variable which is outside both functions. This is a global variable. In the next tutorial, I'll be putting explanation into coding to reinforce the concept.